and conducted extensive threat modeling, architecture, design reviews, and web services. She is working in Freshworks and has delivered training sessions for developers and QA teams. And she is a part of a secure engineering management team. We welcome Saravana Priya, and the session you can take over.
Thank you, Rakesh. Good evening, one and all. So, thank you for taking time to join this session, especially during your busy schedule with India New Zealand matches also happening. So, I promise to keep this presentation short and hopefully not uh, so intense as Super Over. So, thank you once again for joining this presentation. So, this is Saravana Priya. Today, we are going to discuss about a threat modeling detailed approach. Let me share my screen. Okay. So before getting into the presentation, anyone can you explain me what is threat modeling, or do you have any experience, any hands-on experience in it? Just love to hear from you.
So, Anirudh this side. So, basically, threat modeling is a process of identifying threats during the design phase of a software development lifecycle.
Perfect. Exactly. So, threat modeling is nothing but a structured approach, which is used to proactively identify the security risk, which means, okay. So let me break down my terms. So threat modeling is nothing, a structured approach. Structured approach means step-by-step method. So which is used to find the security problems in the application. So instead of randomly looking for the issues, we follow some step-by-step approach, to identify the components, to map how data moves, to find out the vulnerable components, and so on. So this is kind of a structured approach followed by a proactive security, which means, so proactive is nothing but being proactive means checking the security flaws as early as possible. So instead of waiting for an attack to happen, or instead of waiting for a security breach to happen, we try to find out the vulnerabilities or the weakness or the issues, threats that before early in the development cycle itself, design phase kind of thing. So now threat modeling is a structured approach to proactively identify the risk and prioritize remediation. So prioritize remediation is nothing but, so once after we find the risk, right, we just we don't want to just fix them randomly. We don't want to fix all the issues that we have identified in the threat modeling. So we'll focus on the most critical ones first. So some issues are minor, while some other issues may cause major damage if not fixed quickly. So prioritizing the risk is really required in the threat modeling approach. So this is precise explanation of what exactly the threat modeling is. Okay, now why threat modeling is required? So as I said earlier, threat modeling, it is used to identify the issues in the early phase itself. So if what will be happen if we identify the issues in the early stage itself? Let's take one example. If I'm finding out an SQL injection issue in the production stage, okay. Also, if I'm finding the same SQL injection issue in the threat modeling phase itself, so what will be the cost for fixing both the issue? Where will be the cost is high? Any guesses?
I think while production stage, the cost will be very high. If it is on the previous stage itself, it will be much more efficient.
Exactly. So finding and fixing the security issues early stage is much cheaper than fixing them in the later phase. So that the cost will be comparatively less. So for this threat modeling really helps us. Okay, so now so far we have gone through what is threat modeling, why is threat modeling required. What is threat modeling? It is a structured and proactive approach. So we are following a kind of a step-by-step approach to identify the risk in the early phase itself. So why threat modeling phase is required? Like in order to identify the risk early, so that the cost will be reduced when comparing it with the production. Okay, so coming to frameworks, actually we are having a lot of threat modeling frameworks available. So kind of Stride, Pasta, Octave, Bast, Dread, kind of lot of frameworks available. So in this session, like we are going to mainly concentrate only on the Stride approach. So which is one of the most commonly used framework. So going forward, like in this session, like we'll take one real-time example. We'll take one particular any one module and try to apply this Stride framework. So okay, so Stride is nothing but S stands for spoofing, T stands for tampering, R stands for repudiation, I stands for information disclosure, and D for denial of service, and E for elevation of privileges. Okay, spoofing. S stands for spoofing. So spoofing means it is nothing but impersonating something like or someone else to gain unauthorized access. So an attacker pretends to be a legitimate user to gain access to some other resources that they shouldn't be. So kind of impersonation, like spoofing is related to impersonating. Tampering is nothing but modifying the data, which means it involves unauthorized modification of data or something, modification of data or code, something. So attacker alters the data during so in a transit or at rest in order to compromise the integrity. Integrity is nothing but data modification. Okay, so tampering is nothing but modification of data. Spoofing is kind of impersonating someone else, something or someone else. And repudiation is nothing but when a user does something and later denies that he is not the one. The system has also no proof to show actually they did it. So I repeat, repudiation is nothing when a user does something and later denies it. Kind of na-avanillai. He did everything and like then na-avanilla kind of thing. So that is comes under the repudiation. Then coming to information disclosure. Information disclosure is nothing but in name itself is self-explanatory. Information disclosure. So sensitive information, sensitive data is revealed to unauthorized users. And coming to denial of service making the resources or system that is unavailable. Elevation of privilege is again self-explanatory. So here where an attacker gains an admin rights and performing some unauthorized actions. So this is kind of this is something with the Stride framework. Clear so far? Any doubts so far? So I repeat, Stride is nothing but S stands for spoofing, T tampering, R repudiation, I information disclosure, and D denial of service, and E elevation of privileges. So this is one of the framework that we are going to look into detail throughout this session. This is something okay. Okay, so things to consider in the Stride before implementing Stride. So Stride is right. This is kind of what is it this threat, like if we found out any threats, right? For example, if we found any one threat in the data flow, it will not applicable to all the components like data store, process, entities, and all. If we find any issue in the data flow means the flow of data from one component to another component. Let's take one module. Okay, for example, user registration module means what are the components comes in user registration form, followed by and once the user enters some details and submit the form, so we'll be having some verify email kind of component kind of. So data flow means the flow of data from one component to another component. So this is data flow. Data store is kind of a database, we are storing our data in somewhere else. So this is data store. Process. Process is nothing but it is an activity that manipulate the data. Something kind of some queries or something that manipulates, that changes the data. And external entities is nothing but a source or destination of data that exists outside the system. External entities. So which is not in our control. It is kind of outside our control. So while applying the stride framework, right, this we need to consider this as well. So data flow, we need to consider 4 category: data flow, data store, process, and external entities. So coming to data flow, which is vulnerable to tampering. Um, I'm comparing this with the stride approach. So data flow is always vulnerable to tampering, information disclosure, and denial of service. Coming to data store, which is always vulnerable to tampering, information disclosure, repudiation, denial of service. The process, like it is vulnerable to all of the 6 trade categories. And external entities, it is mainly focused, primarily concerned with spoofing and repudiation. So whenever if we will considering the component, right, whenever we if we take any one component or something, we need to consider data flow, data store, process, and external entities for the before applying straight. This is nothing but the spoofing violates authentication. So we are comparing the stride with the security considerations, authentication, integrity, non-repudiation, confidentiality kind of things. So before getting into the threat modeling process, we'll revise once the threat modeling framework. So threat modeling framework, we are going to focus on stride today. So stride, spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and so on. So while applying the stride framework, we should concentrate on data flow, data store, process, and external entities, and which is vulnerable to whichever component in the stride. These things we need to consider. Okay. Now next. So here comes the threat modeling process. Okay. So so your organization has given you a flow diagram and asked you to perform threat modeling. Okay. So so and so, like please work on threat modeling process and submit the report. They are giving you some task. So how are we going to do it? So it has some process. As I said earlier, it is a structured approach, which is a step-by-step approach followed by some process. So here threat modeling process is like initially it has 4 phases, like preparation phase, identification phase, analysis phase, and remediation phase. So 4 phases. This diagram, let me break down this diagram 4 phases into a single phase. Okay, initial phase is like preparation phase. Preparation phase, we have to define scope, identify assets, and identify boundaries. Okay, so the preparation phase mainly consists of 3 things. We need to define scope. I'm giving you, let's say your product team comes in and giving you a data flow or like architecture diagram of the particular component, and they are giving you a process like and ask you to perform a threat modeling. Okay, so how to kickstart the threat modeling? Initially, you have to start with the preparation phase. Okay, so first step in the preparation phase is define scope. You have to define the scope. Defining scope in the sense like whatever comes comes kind of in scope, out of your scope, all those scope definitions you have to define. That is step 1. And step 2 is identify the assets. Assets means assets, it's nothing but kind of the data that needs protection. We'll explain this later. I'll explain this later. I'll come to this later part. And step 3 is identify the trust boundaries. Okay. So phase 1 is preparation phase, in which we have 3 steps: defining scope, identify assets, and identify trust boundaries. Coming to next phase is identification phase. Identification phase is nothing but like here only we are going to identify the issues and all, like we are identifying the threats using some frameworks. So we have discussed a couple of 3 frameworks, right? Stride, PASTA, DREAD, and all. So here we can apply whatever frameworks that depends upon the requirement. If your organization wants you to use Stride framework, you can make use of Stride framework or PASTA framework and so on. So identification phase has 2 steps: identify threats and analyze and prioritize. Analyze threats. So this comes under the identification phase. And the third phase is analysis phase. Analysis phase is nothing but, so we have completed threat modeling and identified risks now. So analysis phase is like we have to prioritize the risk, which risk need to be fixed earlier and which risk need to be concentrated later kind of thing. Prioritization is required. And this is next step is mitigation, kind of providing suggestions and so on, recommendations. And the final phase is remediation phase. Here we'll document and review everything. So that's all. So this is the threat modeling process. So threat modeling process, I repeat, it has 4 phases: preparation phase, identification phase, analysis phase, and remediation phase. The preparation phase is defining the scope, identify assets, and identify the trust boundaries. And identification phase, identify threats, analyze threats. And the third phase is analyze phase. Here prioritize and mitigate the risk. And last phase is remediation phase. Here we'll be reviewing it and documenting all those findings. So that's all. So what I explained, so that will be present in this slide. So we'll skip this for now. Okay. Okay, shall we start threat modeling for a user registration module now? So this is the flow diagram of user registration module. Let's say you are signing up for any of the application. Let's take it example. Let's take for Freshdesk. For example, if you want to sign up for an Freshdesk product, initial stage will be, you will be having a user registration form, like the sign up form, in which the sign up account form. So in which you have to fill your details and submit the details, followed by you'll be getting the email verification, right? You'll be getting the email verification. Once after you verify the email, you will be redirected to password creation page, where we'll be giving out the password, right? Where we'll be entering out the user details, passwords, and so on. Password. After entering into the password, like it will be we will be redirected to login page. Here we'll be giving out the entered username and password. Once after successful authentication, user will be redirected to the dashboard page. That's all. So this is one positive flow. Negative flow is like after login page, you will be redirected to login page. There are chances like you will be forget your password. Again, what happened? You'll be redirected to password reset module. Then upon it will be sending to email verification. Again, same thing happens. So this is one of the flow diagram. Your product team is asking you to do threat modeling. Let's start. Shall we start working on this threat modeling? Start to create threat model for this registration form. Okay. So far, any doubts, team? Is everything clear?
Yes.
Okay. So let's start. Okay. So what is the first step in the preparation phase? What is the first step in the preparation phase? So we have 4 phases, right?
Identify scopes.
Define scope.
Define scope, exactly. So define scope. So we are going to define scope. Okay. Now, can someone tell me, like, this is the module, this is the flow diagram we are giving you for giving you for a threat modeling. Okay. So what are all the topics? What are all the components? Actually, we'll describe this as component. Okay. This individual email verification, password creation, login, these and all kind of component. Okay. Let's check, like, what and all comes in our scope, comes out of scope. User registration form, which will comes under our scope or not for threat modeling process. Your product team asking you to do a threat modeling and they're giving you the flow diagram. Okay, so user registration form which will be comes under our scope, or like comes under our scope means if you identify any threats or something, the code or something that needs to be fixed, right, which will be with us. Okay, so your company is giving you this threat model process and asking you to prepare the flow threat model document. So if you found any registration, any issues in the registration form, right? So your company has to, like, your development team has to fix that. So which means it is in our scope or out of our scope?
It will come to our scope.
Yes, exactly. It will be comes into our scope only, because if we raise or found any issues in the threat modeling process in user registration form, obviously our development team has to fix that, right? So which will be in our scope. So same way we have to categorize in scope and out scope. So defining the scope is the first step. So that's what we did, defining scope. So all other all components comes under our scope. User registration form, email verification, password creation, login page form, dashboard form, password reset, everything comes under our scope for threat modeling. So preparation phase, step 1 gets completed. Defining scope is done. Now moving on to next one. Step 2, identify asserts. What is asserts? As I said earlier, asserts are nothing but the data that needs to be protected. Every data that needs to be protected is asserts. Okay. So what data that needs to be protected? Let's take this user registration form, okay, and email verification form. So what data that needs to be protected? So everything, username, email address, passwords, session tokens. So password reset tokens. If you click on the forget password or something, the password reset tokens, everything, every assert that needs to be protected. So we have to list down all those things. So step 2 is identify assets. So far we have identified our assets as well. So step 1, we are done with the step 1, identify the scope, define the scope, and step 2, identify the assets. And coming to step 3, trust boundaries. Okay. So trust boundaries is nothing but the boundaries, the data that will be moving out of our zone, which means it represents a division. Like we have different components, right? We have different components, user registration form, email verification, and all. So data is moving from one component to another component, which means the user details is moving from user component to user registration form component. So here comes a trust boundary. Like from user registration form, we are moving our data to another component, email verification component. So here comes another trust boundary. So trust boundary is generally nothing but the data, like where the information moves between different component. Okay. So from this component to this component, the data is moving. So here comes a trust boundary. So okay. Now, so if like considering trust boundaries, so these are all the trust boundaries. So from user to user registration form, the data is moving. So there comes one trust boundary. And password management, password, email password, passwords is happening, right? Password settings is happening. So there comes another boundary, kind of. So we'll identify all the trust boundaries. Let me categorize these. Okay. Here comes user registration form, email verification, password creation. All these are different components. Okay. So let us categorize this as client side boundary and server side boundary. Okay. So what and all comes into client side boundary? Client side boundary. Any guesses? We have user registration module, login module, user dashboard module, password creation module, password reset module. What and all comes under client side boundary? Client side means like end user boundary. Just assume this as an application, and think and tell me what comes under client side, like our control. As a end user boundary, what and all comes in? Let's take
User
like
registration forms and email verification also.
email verification. You will be enter your email address, right? The verification will be will the verification be in our control?
Only
Like
user registration will be under our control.
User registration will be our
Password reset
control.
will be under our control.
Password reset form only you will be entering, right?
Uh-huh.
After entering the password reset, you will be redirecting, like one kind of reset mail will be coming to our mailbox, right? Will that be in our control?
The mailbox, no, it is again default sent by the system to our end.
Exactly. So client side boundaries are user registration form, login form, right? Login form. So where we'll be entering our username and password, and user dashboard. User dashboard means after login to the application, we'll be presenting some UI pages, right? So all those UI will be comes under our control. Server side boundary. Server side boundary. What and all comes into server side boundary? Email verification. For example, well, after sign up form, you have entered your email address abc@gmail.com. Okay. So who will be checking for the email, whether if that email is already present in our system and all not? All those email verification will be happening under the server side. So obviously, email verification will be comes under server side boundary. password creation. Who will be create, like we will generate some, we'll create some random password, and password creation and the password reset, this and all comes under the server side boundaries. Okay, so this is what we have divided here. So in this particular flow diagram, particular registration module diagram, we have divided as client boundary, trust boundary. So this is the like step 3 of preparation phase. We are now in step 3 of preparation phase. Step 1, defining scope completed. Step 2, defining asserts completed. Step 3, identifying the boundaries. So we are now identifying the boundary, which is like client boundary and server boundary we have identified. Okay. Now, now after identifying the boundary, we have to list down the possible threats in the each boundary, each component. Okay. So before that, I'll tell you, like we have two main boundaries, right? Client side boundary and trust side boundary. The client side boundary, which is mostly user facing components, so which operates in a user environment, like kind of browser, our devices and all. Okay, so these components are generally considered as less trusted because they can be manipulated by the user. Okay, so the client side trust boundary, which is less trusted because it can be easily modified by any user. Okay, the server side trust boundary, right? Server side trust boundary, all those components operate on the server. So, which means under organization control, our company's control. Okay, so these are generally more trusted comparative to the client side boundaries. Okay, so because they are protected from direct user manipulation. Obviously, user manipulation exists in server trust, server boundary as well, but comparatively, it cannot be directly manipulated by the user. Somewhat protection are there. Okay, so this is the difference between the client side boundary and server side boundary. Okay, now okay, so once identified this green color, right? Green colors and all server side boundary, and the red color mentioned here are client side boundary. Okay, this is not clear. I'll break down these components in the simple side. Okay, so okay, coming to client side trust boundary. First one is user registration. What are all the attacks possible in user registration? Any guesses? UI level attacks. In what attacks possible? What attacks are possible in UI level for registration form? Just kind of think of any registration form. Okay, any registration form. Just think of the attacks. User registration form. Any attack.
Tampering kind of data like SQL injection accesses, stored accesses.
UI level. UI level like end user level.
Click
Okay.
checking.
Exactly. So for the end user level, kind of some attacks like cross-site scripting is possible, right? Client-side validation bypass, for example. Let's say we have an form field, email field, where you are allowed to enter only your business email address. Okay. So abc at some organization.com. Okay. So, but our developers have given only the client-side validation. What can we do to tamper the client-side validation bypass? We'll capture those requests and we'll capture those requests in the burp suite, and before sending to the server, we are modifying that request, and we are giving our personal email address for the sign up, right? So kind of client side validation bypass will be there, and click jacking and so on. And application layer threats is SQL injection, IDAR kind of attacks and all possible. So this is kind of some rough threats only. Apart from this, we have lot of threats listed over it. I'm just listed here some top threats alone. Okay, so these are the threats in the client side boundary of user registration form. Similarly, client side we have what else? Client side login and user dashboard. So user registration we've done, login and user dashboard. Okay. Login page. Coming to login page, so what and all the attacks possible? Coming to login page, we have like remember me kind of checkbox available there. So that is vulnerable. We need to focus on that. Client side JavaScripts. Application like login, right? Login page means brute force attacks, credential stuffing, session fixation attacks, and all possible. Okay. So next comes user dashboard. User dashboard is again comes under the client side trust boundary. Okay. So user dashboard, we have sensitive data information like sensitive exposure, CSRF vulnerabilities after login, right? So CSRF vulnerability is possible, broken access control is possible, information disclosure. So all those comes under this one dashboard. Okay. So user registration. Now we are in step 3 of preparation phase, identifying trust boundaries. We have identified the trust boundaries now, and we are identifying what are all the possible issues within this trust boundary. So again, moving on to server trust boundary, email verification, password creation, password reset. Email verification, what are possible email verification, token leakage, phishing vulnerabilities, and password creation, password strength, insecure password storage, password reuse kind of things. So all those vulnerabilities are possible. So that's all. So now we have completed preparation phase. Okay. So we have completed preparation phase. So defining scope completed, identifying assets completed, identifying the trust boundaries completed. So preparation phase is completed. Okay. So now if your organization asking you to do threat modeling process, threat modeling design kind of thing, are you confident in doing the preparation phase? So far we have done define scope, identify assets, and identify boundaries. So all preparation phase completed. Now moving on to identification phase. Identification phase is to identify the threats. Okay. We are using some approaches. Which approach? Any frameworks we can make use of it. So for now we have we have looked into stride, right? So we are going to use the stride approach. So stride approach we are going to use for this component, every component, each and every component. Okay. So stride approach. What is S stands for? Spoofing, right? So now I'll take only the user registration form, right? The particular same single component alone, user registration component, and I'm listing down all the possibilities of spoofing. Okay. So spoofing spoofing means impersonating someone or something, right? So what possible attack is possible in the user registration component? So attacker may register with some fake IDs or something. Okay. So tampering, what is tampering? Modification of data during transmission. Okay. So manipulation of data can be done. We need to check, actually. We are just listing down all the possibilities. It is not like all those listed threats are occurred in our application. Here we are just listing all the possibilities of threats. We are identifying all the possibilities of threat and we are giving it to the product team. See, we have done threat modeling. These are the possible list of issues that are being identified. Please check before starting development. Please check if you are having proper validation in phase. So that's all. So now it is not like the issues we have listed. We have listed a lot of issues here, right? It is not like this particular user registration module is vulnerable to all these kind of issues. It is like we are just listing down the possibilities of issues. These are all the possibility of issues happening, like possibility of issues that may exist in this component. Please ensure that these issues are addressed while starting the code. Okay, so before development, please make sure that we have proper validations in place to ensure that these fixes are not occurring in the production environment. So that's all. We are giving them just kind of template kind of thing to make sure these issues are not listed. So that's it. So okay, user registration component. So here like spoofing, tampering, repudiation, all those possibilities we are okay. User registration means what and all the possibilities. Repudiation, I told you, right? User denying that they created an account. They may create an account but later deny that I haven't created this account. Information disclosure, possible exposure of personal information during exposure, and denial of service by keeping on sending off automated requests, like keeping on flooding with the malicious user registration creation by giving a lot of fake email IDs and flooding the database. Okay, so comes in denial of service. And elevation of privileges, like trying to create gaining administrative access during registration and so on. So these are the possibilities. I'm just listing out the possibilities of user registration component. So same thing we have for multiple components. So we have different components, right? different components: user registration form, email verification, password reset. We have different components. I have just listed out for few components alone, few components, possibilities, possible threats alone I've listed. So user registration component, email verification again comes in email verification component, and password creation and so on. So these are the possibilities. Okay. Next. So these are the possibilities. So password creation components, same thing: spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure. We are applying straight category. That's it. We are applying straight in each of the component. That's all. So if we take password creation component, we are applying straight here. So possibilities of spoofing, setting passwords for other user accounts, tampering, repudiation, and so on. So that's all. So we have done with second phase of our threat modeling process, which is identification phase. So we have identified the threats and listed out all the threats. Okay. Now step 3. Step 3 is what phase? Step 3, preparation, identification, and step 3 is analysis phase. So analysis phase is like after analyzing the threats, we have to mitigate, give to the product team, development team, for the mitigation, right? So these are all the possible threats identified. Please work on this. Once you are done with the development, please give to us for testing. So again, once after all these issues are identified, all these issues, like we have given kind of these kind of sheet document to them for before development, right? So once product team have completed, our development team have completed entire development, and they're coming back to us. Okay, so we have completed all the development stage, and they're giving us a staging environment. Okay, if they are giving us staging environment testing, what we can do, we need to cover all the possible scenarios we have listed here. Okay, initially during threat modeling phase, we have listed lot of issues here, right? Cross-site scripting, client-side vulnerability. For each component, we have listed many issues, right? All those issues need to be rechecked by us in the there's the environment that they are giving for testing. Maybe so if they have validated if they have fixed all those issues which was given by us during the threat modeling phase, means so in the staging environment or production environment, our application is entirely bug free. So that is the main concept for starting objective for threat modeling, to identify the issues in the early phase itself, so that we will not work on the, or we identify the issues in the staging or other phases. So that's it. So that is the main objective of this. Okay, so this comes the main important thing, like before starting the threat modeling process, right? We need to have these four questions. Actually, we need to keep in mind 4 questions. What are we working on? So far, what we have worked on now? We have worked on user registration module, like user registration module, threat modeling. We are did it, right? So what are we working on? We are going to work on the user registration module. What can go wrong? We have already listed, right? These are the possibilities that can go wrong in our application. Okay, so this is question number 2. What can go wrong? So we have already listed the possibilities of going with, like flaws in application, right? Next, what are we going to do about it? Which means you have identified one issue. Okay, let's take, like we have identified cross-site scripting. Okay, so what we are going to do about it? Okay, we know that our application is vulnerable to cross-site scripting at the login page, or other some use form after user login to application. Okay, so what can we do with that? We can make use of that cross-site scripting to perform an account takeover, or perform to steal cookies, and kind of any attacks. Okay, so that is the thing. Did we do a good job? Means we need to verify, we need to check if there are proper validations are in place or not. So these 4 questions we need to consider before starting a threat modeling process. Okay, so that's all. So far, let me recap. So we have started our presentation with what is threat modeling, What is threat modeling? It is nothing but a structured and proactive approach. So everything is a step-by-step process. Okay. So again, coming to why threat modeling is required. Threat modeling is mainly used to to identify issues in the early development phase itself. Okay. Then what we have discussed, about there are a lot of frameworks available, Stride, Pasta, Active, kind of lot of frameworks available. So one framework that we have focused on today is Stride framework actually. So next what we discussed, threat modeling process, right? Okay, so we have frameworks. Moving on to we discussed about Stride, and we move on to threat modeling process. We have 4 phases in the threat modeling process. What are the 4 phases? Preparation phase, identification phase, analysis phase, and remediation phase. So we have discussed in the preparation phase, we have defined the scope, identify the asserts and trust boundaries, and so on. And identification phase, we have applied the Stride framework. We have applied, this is the identification phase. We have applied the Stride framework to list down the possible threats into the application. And followed by last phase is after analyzing the mitigation phase, like remediation phase. We gave to developers for mitigation. So that's it. All these 4 fundamental questions we need to consider. Okay, so what we did today is kind of manual approach. Okay, so we just took one module and we did it for manually for one module. Okay, so think of an application, think of your development team's work. Okay, so our application, kind of few, if we are able to do threat modeling for us, a single or couple of modules, means we can do it manually. Let's take, if you have any one application, we have around 1,000 plus of module within an application. Is it possible to do manually everything using the approach we discovered? Definitely not. It will take a lot of time. Okay, so there comes the tool. We have lot of threat modeling tools available. Maybe if time permits, if we have a chance to meet some other time, I'll explain you those how to perform threat modeling with the tools, existing tools. Okay, so we have open source tools, lot of open source tools available. WASP, threat tag, and kind of things. This is all open source, completely free. And commercial tools also there exist. These are the commercial tools, lot of commercial tools available. Okay. Also, we have some standards also available, WASP standards, and lot of frameworks available for threat modeling. So that's it. With this, we have come to the end of our presentation. Any doubts so far? So we discussed only a straight framework we discussed, and everything, how to manually approach given and any application for threat modeling. That is what we discussed today. Okay.
Hello, ma'am. I have a question.
Yes.
So, what are all the issues that you have faced in doing threat modeling? It might be an issue with a team perspective, or any non-technical issues that you faced during your threat modeling assignment or assessment.
Okay, so initially, identifying the components in scope, out scope itself, that was major thing faced. What I showed you is kind of only the UI related module, right? For this component, we can directly reach out to developer to address them, whether this is in scope or out scope or not. But there are some modeling, there are some architecture flow diagrams where it involves the servers, the integration components and all there. For example, Freshdesk when integrated with Facebook kind of thing. So integrations means that there comes a lot of components comes in, job queues, SQS, something. So lot of components comes into our scope. So initially, the defining scope was the great one of the big challenge I faced while starting this threat modeling process.
Understood, ma'am. And I have one more question. So, how would you time box a threat modeling process? I can understand that the threat modeling goes on and on. So, with respect to agile threat modeling, we do it in every sprint, so that we do not want to do something like a time box in that case. But when you do for an application which is a legacy application which is already built or something. So in that case, like how will you? What is your approach in time boxing the threat modeling process?
Okay, good question. So, like, what can we do is like initially, like, we don't have to be honest, like our development team generally they are not involving. Like one thing, what we can do is talk with your development team, talk with your development lead. Like what you can do is instead of involving them, instead of giving them the giving us like as we are the security testers, right? So giving us the application for testing the later in either in a environment like staging or production environment. What we can do is we can ask them to involve us in the design phase itself. For example, like if they are going to develop any module or any feature, right? Or definitely the discussion will be going on for the design phase kind of thing. Or they'll be having some for example, if they are going to create one user registration form module. Okay, so as a testers, as a security testers, it will be come to us at the end of the development in the last phase of the development only. Okay, so what can we do is we can talk with the development team and ask them to involve security team early in the design phase itself, while preparing, while they are performing kind of discussions, right? Module discussions and our module development discussion, we can ask them to involve security team in the in those discussion itself, so that we can analyze the application framework, that the diagram, the flow diagram and so on, everything, and we can give them the suggestion the early phase itself. So this will be really useful for them. Also it will actually reduce our work itself. Like at the end of the staging and production testing, we have found a lot of issues, right? So that will be comparatively less if you gave them possible list of issues identified in the design phase itself. So, so we can talk with the development team and ask them to involve us. So that we can do.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much for answering my questions.
Thank you. Okay, so let's any other questions? Shall we start do one simple quiz? I'll share the link in this chat.
Yeah, I will circulate it in the groups because of the time limit. I guess the call gonna drop very soon. Apologies for that.
Oh, no problem, no problem. This will not take maximum of 5 minutes, like only 5% actually.
Okay. Maybe I will circulate it.
Sure, sure,
If that's
sure, sure.
fine for you. Okay.
So,
Thanks everyone for joining. Enjoy watching the India vs New Zealand match, and thank you, Sarona Priya, for the amazing session. I think participants take away something new and interesting thing. Let's see you all in next event.
thank you. Thanks a lot, team, for this, for your wonderful time.
Thank you so much. See you guys.